This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a system that still looks familiar, still uses the same language, still holds the same ceremonies, while quietly no longer functioning the way you think it does. What you're watching right now is not chaos. It's something colder than that. It's drift. The rules didn't collapse. They softened. Enforcement didn't disappear. It detached. And while attention is pulled towards spectacle, something structural has been repurposed underneath daily life. Not replaced, not overthrown, redirected. You feel it as pressure, as exhaustion, as the sense that nothing is quite accountable anymore. Stay with me, because the danger here is subtle. And once it becomes obvious, it's already too late. This didn't start loudly. It didn't announce itself. And the next piece of this only makes sense once you see what is actually in control now. What actually governs the system now is not law or markets or even ideology. It's leverage. The ability to apply pressure without explanation, to move force without accountability, to separate consequence from decision. Power no longer needs to persuade. It only needs to demonstrate that it can act, selectively, unevenly, unpredictably. That is the shift. When institutions stop responding to outcomes and start responding to optics, control migrates. Quietly, from rules to reactions, from policy to performance, from accountability to enforcement theater. You're told the system is strained, that this is temporary. That disorder explains the damage, but disorder isn't what you're seeing. You're seeing a structure that still collects taxes, still deploys force, still negotiates abroad, while no longer absorbing the cost of its own decisions. That cost is pushed outward, onto households, onto workers, onto cities, onto everyone who can't reroute the pressure. Once leverage replaces legitimacy, stability becomes an illusion. And the next phase doesn't announce itself either, because this didn't happen overnight. It was trained into place. And that slow training is where this becomes dangerous. There was a time when pressure moved downward slowly. You could see it coming. Debates happened first, warnings followed, then consequences. That order mattered. What changed wasn't a single decision. It was the normalization of speed. Before, extraordinary measures required extraordinary moments. Now, they arrive preloaded, ready, waiting for a reason later. Economic strain used to trigger intervention. Now it triggers enforcement. Public unrest used to demand explanation. Now it invites containment. Foreign tension once slowed decision-making. Now it accelerates it. None of this felt dramatic in the moment. That's why it worked. Each shift was framed as temporary, as necessary, as efficient. And because nothing officially broke, the system was declared intact. But systems don't fail all at once. They recalibrate what they respond to. Over time, responsiveness gave way to reflex. Process gave way to posture. You were told this was resilience, adaptation, strength. In reality, it was a quiet retraining, teaching power to move first and justify later. And once a system learns that speed beats consent, it doesn't slow down on its own. It looks for stress. It looks for friction. And eventually it finds a moment where that reflex is tested in public. That's where this stops being abstract. Then the pressure surfaced, not as policy, as a scene. Force deployed domestically, not to solve a problem, but to demonstrate presence. Crowds treated as variables, public space treated as a risk to be neutralized. This wasn't about restoring order. Order was never defined. It was about showing that escalation could happen faster than explanation. At the same time, wealth pooled visibly elsewhere, behind gates, behind choreography, behind spectacle that felt detached from the economic reality most people were navigating. That contrast matters. Because while households absorbed rising costs, shrinking margins, and constant uncertainty, the system displayed comfort, even celebration, at the top. That's not coincidence. That's signaling. When enforcement appears faster than relief and performance appears louder than response, the message is simple. Pressure flows one way. You may not have been in that crowd, you may not have seen the force up close, but you recognized the imbalance. If this feels unsettling, good. It means you're seeing the system, not the story it tells about itself. And here's the part that should make you pause. This wasn't an exception. It was a test, and the results didn't slow anything down. They encouraged the mechanism underneath to keep going. Here's how the mechanism actually works. Pressure is no longer resolved. It's redistributed. When costs rise, they don't move upward toward decision makers. They move outward. They fragment. They become individualized. Rent increases don't register as policy failure. They register as personal budgeting problems. Job loss doesn't trigger structural review. It becomes a resume issue. Public unrest doesn't demand reform. It invites containment, surveillance, and faster response protocols. Meanwhile, those insulated from the pressure gain flexibility. They reroute money. They reroute risk. They reroute accountability. This is the trade. The system preserves its appearance by exporting its damage. And because that damage arrives piecemeal, one household, one city, one sector at a time, it never quite looks like a crisis. Just a series of unfortunate circumstances until you add them up. That's when you see who benefits. Stability at the top, volatility everywhere else. And once a system learns it can survive by shifting pain instead of fixing causes, it stops trying to correct itself. It waits for the next stressor. And when it comes, the response is faster, sharper, less apologetic, which brings us to the second shock, and this one moves quicker. This time it didn't unfold slowly. It snapped. Decisions compressed. Signals crossed. Force moved before consensus could form. Economic pressure intensified. Social tolerance thinned. International posture hardened. None of these pieces caused the others. They synchronized. That's what acceleration looks like. When systems are stressed long enough, they stop sequencing responses. They stack them. Containment overlaps with austerity. Rhetoric overlaps with enforcement. External tension overlaps with internal strain. Everything happens at once. And because nothing is formally declared an emergency, there is no pause button, no reset, no moment where someone stands up and says, this is too much. Instead, each escalation is framed as isolated, necessary, proportionate. But the speed tells a different story. This is no longer a system reacting to problems. It's a system reacting to itself. Every move tightens the feedback loop. Every response creates the conditions for the next one. You can feel it now, the shortened fuse, the lack of margin. And when margin disappears, mistakes stop being recoverable, which is why the most dangerous part of this isn't the force you can see. It's the pressure you're expected to absorb quietly. This is where it reaches you. Not as theory, as routine. You plan more carefully now. You delay things you used to assume were stable. You feel the constant need to stay compliant. Not because you did something wrong, but because the margin for error is gone. You notice it in small decisions. What you say at work, where you stand in public, how much attention you draw to yourself. Pressure teaches behavior. And the system doesn't need to threaten you directly. It just needs to make examples visible enough that you adjust on your own. That's the efficiency. You absorb costs that were once collective. You internalize risks that were once shared. You manage stress that used to belong to institutions. And because you're busy surviving, the system counts on you not having time to connect the dots. If this feels familiar, don't scroll away. This isn't abstract. This is the lived consequence of everything we've been tracing. Stay with me, because once pressure becomes personal, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads across households, across cities, across borders, and that's where the next phase begins. Once pressure stops being local, it starts to travel. Markets react before diplomats do. Alliances adjust before announcements are made. Defensive postures harden quietly without explanation. What looks like overreaction is actually anticipation. When a system shows it's willing to move fast at home, others assume it can do the same abroad. So they prepare, they hedge, they stop trusting signals and start watching behavior. This is how instability globalizes, trade routes tighten, capital seeks quieter ground, security cooperation becomes conditional. Nothing dramatic is declared, no formal rupture occurs. But the assumptions that held things together begin to fray. You see it in coordinated exercises, in sudden realignments, in the way neutral ground stops feeling neutral. The danger here isn't conflict, it's miscalculation, because systems under pressure don't communicate clearly. They signal strength. They compress timelines. They remove ambiguity by force. And when multiple systems do that at once, the margin for error disappears globally, not just domestically. What started as internal strain now shapes external expectations, and that changes the future landscape, whether anyone admits it or not. Which brings us to what happens next. Not a prediction, a set of paths. all accelerating. From here, the system has three possible trajectories, not outcomes, paths. The first is adjustment. Pressure forces recalibration. Institutions relearn restraint. Costs are pulled back upwards slowly, nothing dramatic, just enough correction to restore friction, margin, pause. This path is quiet and rare. The second is erosion. The system keeps functioning but thinner. Rules remain but selectively applied. Force becomes routine. Relief becomes conditional. Life doesn't collapse. It narrows. You adapt. You lower expectations. You accept volatility as normal. This path is comfortable for power and exhausting for everyone else. The third path is rupture, not revolution, not collapse, a misstep. A decision made too fast, under too much pressure, without enough margin to recover. Domestic strain meets external reaction. Leverage meets resistance. And suddenly, the mechanisms that were supposed to control risk amplify it instead. The system doesn't choose this path intentionally. It stumbles into it. Which path emerges isn't determined by speeches or elections alone. It's determined by how much pressure continues to be absorbed quietly, and how much margin is left when something finally gives. We're not at the end yet, but we're past the point where the direction is neutral. One more part remains. This is not the moment where everything breaks. That's the mistake people make, waiting for a dramatic ending that signals permission to worry. Systems like this don't warn you when they're crossing a line. They normalize it. They make each step feel survivable until survival becomes the job. What you've been watching isn't instability. It's a redefinition of what stability means. Who carries it, who pays for it, and who gets to step outside of it. No one will announce when the margin is gone. You'll notice it when errors stop being reversible, when pressure no longer disperses, when response replaces responsibility entirely. If you're still here, good. That means you're paying attention before it's obvious. Don't treat this as a warning that resolves itself. Treat it as a pattern that continues whether it's named or not. In the next video, we go one level deeper into how this kind of system teaches people to accept less while demanding more, and why that acceptance is the most valuable resource of all. Stay curious, stay alert, because once pressure becomes the organizing principle, it doesn't need your consent. It just needs your silence.